In a world where injustice and discrimination often go unnoticed, the story of Amanda Washington serves as a powerful reminder that standing up for what is right can bring about meaningful change. One of the most important lessons from her journey is that individuals, no matter how powerful or humble, can make a difference when they refuse to accept the status quo. Amanda's actions didn't just challenge the practices of a single company, they sparked a movement that transformed an entire industry. This story teaches us that the fight for fairness is not always easy, but it is always worth it. It reminds us that our voices have power, especially when we stand together to demand change. Whether you are in your 60s or 90s, it is never too late to advocate for what's just. We all have experiences and wisdom that can help break down the barriers that divide us, and by sharing these stories, we contribute to a better, more inclusive world. If you've ever experienced or witnessed injustice, remember that your story matters. Speak up. Share your thoughts. Don't let the opportunity for positive change pass by. The impact of standing firm against wrongdoing can last far longer than we imagine. So I encourage you to reflect on this story, think about how you can make a difference, and feel empowered to speak up for justice. Together, we can all help create a more respectful and compassionate world. Let's continue the conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I have an incredible story to share with you. A story of courage, power, and the kind of justice that'll make you rethink everything you know about corporate power dynamics. Imagine this. You're a Black CEO, traveling for one of the biggest business deals of your career. You're dressed to impress, ready to secure a game-changing contract worth billions. But when you approach the gate for your first-class flight, you're stopped, humiliated, and denied boarding, not because of anything you did wrong, but because of who you are. Sounds unbelievable, right? But that's exactly what happened to Amanda Thompson, and the way she turned the tables on an entire airline will blow your mind. What happens next will make you question, how much power does a person really have when they refuse to be silenced? And can one woman's fight against discrimination change the entire airline industry forever? Trust me, you won't want to miss how Amanda used her incredible skills and influence to expose systemic injustice and force an airline giant to its knees. If you've ever experienced something like this, or if you have a story of your own where you stood up against injustice, I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's get the conversation going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you don't miss any of our next powerful stories. On the morning of the incident, Amanda was preparing for one of the most important moments of her career. As the CEO of Nexus Technologies, she had been invited to speak at the Global Tech Innovation Summit in Singapore, where she would deliver the keynote address that could secure a $500 million investment from the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund. This investment wasn't just money. It would propel Nexus to new heights, funding their most ambitious projects to date. As she packed her bag in her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Amanda was calm, focused, and ready to take on the world. However, the moment she stepped into LaGuardia Airport, things took an unexpected turn. Having flown first class countless times before, Amanda approached the premium check-in area with ease. But before she could reach the counter, a gate agent intercepted her, pointing her towards the economy check-in line. Confused, Amanda explained, "I'm flying first class to Singapore," holding up her boarding pass. The agent barely glanced at it, instead repeating, "Economy check-in is that way." Undeterred, Amanda walked to the premium counter, where she was greeted by another agent who processed her check-in without issue. Though there was a visible surprise on the agent's face as she confirmed Amanda's booking. After completing the check-in process, Amanda proceeded to security, only to be selected for random screening. This wasn't unusual for anyone, but as she approached the TSA checkpoint, things took a strange turn. Three white businessmen, dressed in expensive suits, were waved through the premium lane with no scrutiny. Yet Amanda, dressed in a professional but simple outfit, was directed to the enhanced screening area. Her frustration began to rise. The humiliation was palpable as the TSA agents conducted an invasive pat-down, lingering longer than necessary. But Amanda, ever composed, maintained her calm demeanor. It wasn't her first time facing adversity, and it wouldn't be the last. What she didn't know at that moment, however, was that her day of frustration was only just beginning. By the time Amanda reached the gate for her flight to Singapore, the tension she had felt earlier had turned into a simmering storm. After the invasive security check, Amanda was already feeling the weight of the discriminatory treatment she had experienced, but nothing could prepare her for what would happen next. As she approached the first-class boarding lane, she was met with suspicion once again. "Excuse me, ma'am, this lane is for first-class passengers only," said a gate agent named Meredith, her voice sharp and her gaze skeptical. Amanda calmly handed over her boarding pass, explaining, "I'm in seat 2A, first class." Meredith took the boarding pass but scrutinized it as though Amanda were attempting to board a flight without a ticket. After an uncomfortable pause, she told Amanda to wait as she picked up the phone, speaking in hushed tones, glancing up at Amanda now and then, her look filled with disbelief. Amanda's heart sank as she stood there, trying to remain calm. She watched the scene unfold in front of her. She could feel the stares of the passengers nearby, some of them clearly puzzled, while others appeared to be silently judging her. The agent's actions were painfully clear. There was something about her skin, that made her presence in first class seem like an anomaly in their eyes. Minutes ticked by, and it wasn't long before Richard Bronson, the customer service supervisor, arrived at the gate. His face bore a permanent scowl as he eyed Amanda up and down. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, directing his question to Meredith, as though Amanda were invisible. "She says she has a first-class ticket," Meredith replied, her emphasis on the word "says," making Amanda's claim seem dubious. Richard took the boarding pass, his gaze cold and dismissive. He didn't ask her to explain her situation. Instead, he scrutinized the boarding pass, then looked at Amanda, almost mockingly. "Ma'am, do you know how expensive first-class tickets on international flights are?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. It was a question loaded with implications. He seemed to suggest that someone like her, a black woman, couldn't possibly afford such luxury. Amanda remained composed, but the sting of his words was undeniable. She had worked tirelessly to build Nexus Technologies into the powerhouse it had become. She didn't need to justify her success to anyone, but the way Richard was speaking to her and the way Meredith had treated her was about far more than just an expensive ticket. It was about the bias they couldn't hide and the prejudice embedded in their actions. "No, I don't know how expensive it is," she replied coolly, her voice measured. "But I do know I paid for my seat just like everyone else here, and I intend to board." Richard's smirk didn't falter. "We'll need to verify your ticket," he said, his words dripping with suspicion. "There seems to be some irregularity." It was the moment that Amanda knew this wasn't about a simple mistake. It was about something far deeper. This was harassment disguised as procedure. "An irregularity?" Amanda asked, her voice steady but rising in defiance. "I've already shown you my boarding pass. What irregularity?" Instead of addressing her concerns, Richard insisted, "I'll need to see additional documentation. Passport, credit card used for the purchase, and company authorization for the expenditure." It was a clear and deliberate attempt to make her feel small, as though she had no right to question his authority. No other passenger was being asked for such proof, but it didn't matter. Amanda was being singled out, not because of any legitimate security concern, but because of who she was. She refused to provide the unnecessary documentation. Her passport was enough. But Richard wouldn't let it go. Amanda could feel the eyes of the passengers around her. Some of them were recording the interaction with their phones, while others looked uncomfortable. She stood her ground, refusing to let them get away with this. It was then that she demanded to see the system. "Show me the booking system. I want to see the first-class manifest for this flight." Richard hesitated, but eventually he turned the monitor towards her. To his surprise, Amanda knew exactly what she was looking at. She didn't need to be a tech CEO to understand that there were 3 open first-class seats on the next flight to Singapore. The very flight she had been denied boarding for, the lie was exposed. "There are 3 available first-class seats," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You're lying to me." Richard quickly turned the monitor away, attempting to salvage the situation. "Those seats are blocked for operational reasons," he muttered. "Operational reasons," Amanda pressed. "Or discriminatory reasons." She raised her voice just enough to make sure the other passengers could hear. They had been watching the entire interaction, some of them silently judging, but now they were beginning to listen. Richard's face turned red as he sputtered. "We can rebook you on the next flight, but I'm afraid first class is fully booked. We can offer you an economy seat instead." This was the final insult. Amanda had paid thousands of dollars for her seat, and now they were suggesting she take an economy seat, while keeping the difference for themselves. Amanda's fury was now unmistakable. She demanded to be rebooked in first class on the next flight, but Richard insisted that she lower her voice. He was attempting to deflect the blame onto her, to make her the problem in a situation that he had created. "I will not be silenced when I'm being discriminated against," Amanda replied, her voice carrying with unshakable confidence. Richard, desperate to rid himself of the situation, called security. Two guards approached, forcefully grabbing Amanda's arm. But Amanda wasn't going to let them push her around. As she was being escorted away, she noticed Bradley Winters, the CEO of SkyGlobe Airlines, standing in the background. She could see the smirk on his face. He was enjoying the situation, enjoying her discomfort. But what he didn't know was that this moment, this very moment, was going to cost him everything. Amanda's mind raced. She wasn't just a passenger in this situation. She was an investor in SkyGlobe, a significant one. The world was about to find out just how powerful she was, and just how big a mistake it was to underestimate her. The day of reckoning for SkyGlobe Airlines had just begun. As Amanda was escorted away from the customer service desk, her mind raced. She had been through too much to let this moment slide by unnoticed. They had wrongfully detained her, harassed her, and denied her the rightful seat she had paid for. She could feel the eyes of the crowd, the judgmental stares, but it wasn't just about the mistreatment. It was about something much bigger, something far more profound. Amanda was a woman who had been underestimated her entire life. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood where success was a distant dream, she knew what it was like to fight for what you wanted. She had earned her place in the world, and she wasn't about to let anyone, especially a group of biased airline employees, strip that away from her. The disrespect she had endured at the hands of SkyGlobe's staff was more than just personal. It was emblematic of the systemic issues of racism and discrimination that plagued institutions across the country. And now SkyGlobe was about to learn the consequences of their actions. Still, Amanda stayed composed, even as the security guards tightened their grip on her arm. The airport was buzzing with confusion, passengers talking in hushed tones as word spread about the confrontation. Some were sympathetic, others simply watched in silence, too afraid to intervene. But Amanda didn't need them. She had the power to fight back, not with anger, but with strategy. As she was forcibly escorted through the terminal, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus Chen, her chief strategy officer, calling about the Singapore conference. She paused, standing her ground despite the forceful tug of the guards. "I need to take this call," she said calmly, not asking, but telling them. The guards hesitated, not sure how to respond. Amanda stepped aside, giving them no choice but to wait as she answered the call. "Marcus, what's the status?" Amanda's voice shifted from steely calm to professional as she fell into the rhythm of the business conversation. Her legal team had been preparing for the final meeting with the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, and this deal was her ticket to ensuring the next phase of Nexus Technologies' expansion. "The Singapore Sovereign Fund needs our recommendation by tomorrow morning," Marcus explained, urgency in his voice. "They need to know which airline will be recommending for their corporate contract before the acquisition paperwork is finalized." Amanda's mind quickly connected the dots. She wasn't just a passenger on this flight. She was evaluating airlines for a global corporate deal worth $3.7 billion over the next 5 years. This wasn't just about a flight. This was a test. And SkyGlobe, with its discriminatory practices and poor customer service, had just failed. "I've seen enough," she said with quiet conviction, her eyes locking on Bradley Winters, the CEO of SkyGlobe, who was now pacing furiously at the other end of the terminal, his face a mask of frustration. "Remove SkyGlobe from consideration immediately. Draft the recommendation for Singapore Airlines instead." Marcus's voice sounded slightly strained on the other end. "There's another issue, Amanda. The market's getting nervous about our position in SkyGlobe. There are rumors that we might be divesting." Amanda's pulse quickened, but she didn't show it. How bad is it? Bad, Marcus replied. You control 28% of Sky Globe's stock through our investment firm, Horizon Capital. That's the largest ownership block in the airline, even larger than the Winters family holdings. The board's starting to panic. Amanda smiled slightly, the first glimmer of satisfaction in the middle of the chaos. She had always known her power, financial, strategic, and now it seemed she had the power to bring down an empire that thought it was untouchable. As Amanda stood there feeling the tension in the air, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. Years ago, she had been an outsider, underestimated and overlooked. Today, she was the woman about to dismantle one of the most powerful companies in the aviation industry. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. The systemic racism she had endured throughout her life was something far too many people had experienced. For Amanda, this moment was a stand, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced, marginalized, or ignored. The airport was a chaotic scene. Passengers who had been waiting for their flights were now huddled in small groups, murmuring in confusion and concern. The tension was palpable as word spread through the terminal about what had transpired. Sky Globe employees at the customer service desk looked anxious, glancing at each other as they tried to regain control of the situation. The hum of phones being pulled out, the clicking of cameras recording the drama unfolding, it was clear that something monumental was happening. Amanda knew that Sky Globe had miscalculated. They had no idea who they were dealing with. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, this was a reckoning. She could see the shift happening in real time as the eyes of the crowd began to turn. Initially, there were those who sided with the airline, the passengers who felt inconvenienced by the delay and whispered their judgment. But as the truth began to sink in, the mood shifted. Some passengers were even recording, capturing every second of this unraveling disaster. It wasn't long before the media arrived. Local news crews, reporters with microphones and cameras in tow, rushed toward the scene. The tension in the terminal reached a new height. Amanda, still calm, knew this moment was no longer just about her. This was about exposing the deep-seated issues within the corporate culture of Sky Globe and the systemic discrimination that so many had quietly tolerated for far too long. Bradley Winters, the CEO of Sky Globe, had been oblivious to what was happening at first. He had been too caught up in his own world, his privileged world, to consider that someone might challenge his authority, his power, and his company's discriminatory practices. But now, as the media gathered and the story started to go viral, he was beginning to understand just how big of a mistake he had made. Amanda wasn't someone you could brush off. She wasn't someone who would back down. As the reporters started to gather, cameras rolling, Amanda stepped forward. She had a story to tell, and she would make sure the world heard it. Her voice, steady and unwavering, echoed through the terminal as she addressed the growing crowd, the reporters, and the passengers who had been silently watching. "My name is Amanda Washington," she began, her voice carrying across the terminal, commanding the attention of everyone within earshot. "I am the CEO of Nexus Technologies, and I came to this airport today as a paying customer with a first-class ticket to Singapore. I was denied boarding not because of anything I did wrong, but because of what I look like." A hush fell over the crowd. Even those who had been skeptical, who had questioned her presence, now turned their heads, listening intently. She continued, not letting her composure falter. "What happened to me today is not unique. It happens to people who look like me every day in airports, in offices, in public spaces across this country. The difference today is that I have the power to demand accountability," Amanda said, her gaze fixed firmly on Bradley Winters, who was now standing at the back of the terminal, looking more nervous than ever. Amanda's words hung in the air like a declaration. The crowd was rapt, many of them pulling out their phones, searching her name online as they realized who she was. She had made her mark not just as a tech mogul, but as a symbol of strength and defiance. But as Bradley approached her, trying to regain control of the situation, Amanda knew it was far from over. Bradley's voice cracked as he tried to smooth things over. "Miss Washington, I apologize for the inconvenience this has caused," he said, his voice faltering under the weight of her gaze. Amanda's expression remained unchanged. "This isn't about inconvenience, Mr. Winters," she said, her voice laced with authority. "This is about systemic discrimination embedded in your company's culture, a culture that you have personally fostered and allowed to thrive. And now it's time for you to face the consequences." The silence in the terminal deepened as Amanda's words hit home. She wasn't backing down. This was not a minor dispute that would be swept under the rug with an apology. This was about exposing the truth, about holding people and companies accountable for their actions. And it wasn't just about her, it was about the countless others who had been treated unjustly, who had been made to feel invisible simply because of their race, gender, or background. Bradley's face flushed with anger and embarrassment as the magnitude of the situation started to sink in. He opened his mouth to respond, but Amanda was ready. "I have evidence," Amanda said, pulling out her tablet, clicking through the files and documents that her team had compiled over the last several months. "You see, Mr. Winters, we've been documenting the discriminatory practices at Sky Globe for months now. We've interviewed passengers, we've collected data, and we've captured the patterns in your airline's treatment of people based on their race and appearance. You failed your customers, and now the world is going to see that." Bradley's face turned pale as the documents Amanda displayed painted a damning picture. It wasn't just one isolated incident. It was a long-standing pattern that had been ignored for years. His attempts at damage control were falling apart, and the weight of his failure was becoming increasingly visible. As the media crew swarmed around her, capturing every moment, Amanda's calmness remained unshaken. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been wronged, every person who had been discriminated against and told their experiences didn't matter. The situation was only escalating, and Bradley was running out of time. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. As the press conference unfolded, Amanda stood tall, her composure unwavering. She had fought for this moment for so long, for the truth to come to light. Sky Globe Airlines had underestimated her, and now they were beginning to realize just how far-reaching the consequences of their actions were. This wasn't just a personal battle anymore. It had become a fight for justice, not only for herself, but for every person who had ever been denied their dignity because of discrimination. The scene in the terminal was chaotic. The crowd had grown to an overwhelming size, and the news crews had multiplied, their cameras now trained on the unfolding drama. People from all over were gathering, captivated by what was happening before their eyes. But for Amanda, this wasn't about the spectacle. It was about making a statement, about holding the people who had wronged her accountable. Bradley Winters, visibly sweating and shaking, was trapped in a corner, his mind racing as the realization dawned that his company's public image, and perhaps his career, was hanging in the balance. But his confusion and panic were no longer her problem. He had created this mess, and now it was his turn to face the music. Amanda had already made up her mind. Sky Globe Airlines would never be the same again. "Sky Globe has failed to live up to its own policies," Amanda's voice rang out, cutting through the noise of the crowd. "It's time for a complete overhaul. The world is changing, and the airline industry needs to change with it." This isn't just about one incident. It's about years of institutionalized discrimination. And today Sky Globe will be held accountable. The words hung in the air, resonating not just with the crowd at the terminal, but with viewers all over the world. The footage was already viral. Amanda had become a symbol of courage, a woman who had turned an ordinary airport gate into the epicenter of an international reckoning. But it wasn't just her bravery that was captivating. It was the truth she was speaking. Bradley's eyes widened in disbelief as Amanda continued. "And here's the truth you've been trying to hide. You've been running your business on the backs of people like me, people of color, people who are overlooked, who are mistreated, and who have no voice. Well, today, you've met someone who isn't going to stay silent." The crowd murmured in agreement, nodding and whispering to each other. Some people who had once been passive observers of the situation were now starting to understand the gravity of what Amanda had been saying. This wasn't a simple case of a flight being delayed. It was the result of years of systemic racism, unchecked power, and arrogance. Sky Globe, once proud of its reputation for luxury and service, had now become a poster child for corporate malfeasance. Amanda wasn't finished yet. She knew there was more to be done. The battle was only beginning. As she turned back to Bradley, she addressed him directly, her voice steady yet firm. You might have thought you could make this go away with a few apologies and a promise to do better. But you've already shown us your true colors. You've ignored the needs of your passengers and your employees. You've allowed this culture of bias to fester, and now it's time to tear it down. Bradley took a deep breath, his confidence from earlier now completely gone. He was no longer the powerful CEO that had once commanded respect. He was just a man who had lost control of his own company. Amanda could see it in his eyes, the realization that his position, his wealth, and his influence were all on the line. There was nothing he could do now to fix what had been broken. As the confrontation grew more intense, members of Sky Globe's board began arriving at the terminal, each one looking more concerned than the last. The impact of the media coverage and the financial drop in the airline's stock value had become undeniable. The company was hemorrhaging money, and every minute that passed made it harder to control the narrative. The board had been informed about the situation, and now they had to face the truth. The stories of racism, bias, and discrimination had become a ticking time bomb, and Sky Globe's future was hanging in the balance. As the board members huddled together in the corner, some tried to reason with Bradley, but it was clear that the damage had already been done. The airline's failure to address its issues would not go unnoticed any longer. Amanda had already ensured that. She had set the stage for a fundamental change, and no one, not even the board, could stop it. In the background, Amanda's legal team had been working tirelessly to compile evidence, meticulously documenting the pattern of discriminatory practices that had occurred at Sky Globe for years. They had gathered testimonials from passengers, former employees, and even mystery shoppers who had witnessed firsthand how Sky Globe's policies had hurt people of color. Amanda had made sure that everything was in place for the coming battle. She wasn't just going to stop at making a point. She was going to ensure that change happened, no matter how painful it was for the company. Bradley, desperate to salvage his reputation, turned to his colleagues for help, but it was clear he was out of his depth. Amanda wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for an entire system to be restructured, for justice to be served. And as Sky Globe's board of directors now took their seats, realizing the magnitude of what had just transpired, they knew their company would never be the same. The airline industry had just entered a new era, one where accountability would no longer be an afterthought. And Amanda Washington, once overlooked and dismissed, had become the woman who changed everything. The Sky Globe reckoning had just begun. As the weeks passed following the incident at Gate 37B, the consequences of Amanda's actions continued to ripple through the corporate world. Sky Globe Airlines, once a symbol of luxury and status, found itself in a crisis of unprecedented scale. The airline's public image had crumbled, and its financial prospects were now uncertain. As the news spread, the story of Amanda's confrontation had become a global sensation, highlighted by mainstream media and shared across social media platforms. The hashtag #Sky Globe Reckoning was trending worldwide, and people were beginning to demand real, tangible change in corporate America. The airline's board members, many of whom had been initially resistant to taking any real action, now found themselves under immense pressure. The combination of public outrage, the loss of high-profile corporate contracts, and a rapid drop in stock prices left them with no choice but to act decisively. The financial cost of continuing to operate under the same toxic corporate culture had become untenable. And so a major restructuring was set in motion, led by a new interim CEO who would help the airline start anew. But the transformation that Sky Globe was undergoing wasn't just a superficial fix. It was clear to everyone involved that this was a moment for real introspection and reformation. Amanda had sparked something much larger than a single protest or corporate scandal. She had ignited a movement that was forcing the entire airline industry to examine its own practices, its treatment of passengers, and its responsibility to uphold dignity and fairness in every aspect of its operations. As part of the reforms, Sky Globe committed to overhauling its internal policies, implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees, and establishing an independent body to monitor its progress moving forward. Amanda wasn't just watching from the sidelines, though. She had become a key figure in the ongoing transformation, both in the airline industry and in corporate America. Sky Globe had reached out to her, asking for her guidance in helping them navigate this moment of change. While some saw this as an opportunity to profit or gain influence, Amanda remained focused on the larger picture. She wasn't interested in personal gain. She wanted accountability, and she wanted systemic change. She had made it clear that she wouldn't be part of any solution that didn't involve complete transparency, deep self-reflection, and real action against discrimination. Her role in shaping the future of Sky Globe was pivotal, but it was the ripple effect that truly captured the attention of the nation. Other companies within the airline industry began to take notice. United Airlines, Delta, and American Airlines each announced their own internal reviews and began launching anti-discrimination initiatives. Pressure from the public and from employees forced them to rethink their policies and practices. Amanda's confrontation at Gate 37B had set the stage for an unprecedented level of self-examination across the entire industry. Corporate leaders who had once dismissed such issues as inconvenient were now scrambling to implement new protocols in an attempt to avoid facing similar public backlash. The effects of Amanda's actions were seen not only in the airline industry, but also in the broader corporate world. Investors, too, had become more aware of the importance of diversity and inclusion initiatives. Major firms started incorporating more rigorous scrutiny of their own corporate cultures. Shareholders began demanding proof that companies were addressing systemic discrimination, with some even pushing for the removal of executives who had been complicit in fostering toxic work environments. One of the most powerful moments came when Amanda was invited to speak at a national business summit, where leaders from some of the world's largest corporations gathered to discuss the future of corporate ethics. She stood before an audience of thousands, her words carrying weight that only someone who had lived through the challenges of discrimination could convey. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We can no longer afford to tolerate environments that make it acceptable to overlook the rights and dignity of others. Change doesn't just happen from the top down. It requires a cultural shift, one that starts with each of us." Her speech was met with a standing ovation, but more importantly, it sparked a series of conversations that would continue for months. Amanda had taken a personal injustice and turned it into a call for justice that reverberated across corporate boardrooms, congressional hearings, and community organizations. It wasn't just about one airline anymore. It was about dismantling systems of power that allowed discrimination to thrive unchecked. As for Sky Globe, the company that had once denied her rightful seat in first class, it was undergoing a total reinvention. New leadership, new policies, and a focus on truly listening to its diverse customer base became part of the company's rebranding effort. The changes were not easy, and not everyone within the organization embraced the transformation. But Amanda was determined to ensure that Sky Globe's history of exclusion was erased and replaced with a culture of inclusion and respect. Within 6 months, Sky Globe launched its first flight with a completely restructured management team. The company now had a more diverse leadership, with women and people of color holding prominent positions, including the first Latina CEO of the airline. The message was clear. Change was possible. In fact, it was necessary. Bradley Winters, on the other hand, had retreated from the public eye, his career in tatters. He never returned to the aviation industry, and rumors circulated that he had started working with community organizations focused on improving economic opportunities for youth in underrepresented communities. It was a surprising turn for a man who had once wielded such power, but perhaps it was the only way for him to atone for the damage he had caused. Amanda's fight was far from over, but she had set in motion a wave of change that would continue to ripple through the business world for years to come. She had shown the world that one person, one voice, could make a difference. In her case, it wasn't just about fighting for herself. It was about fighting for the many people who had been silenced for far too long. The legacy of her courage was now part of the larger conversation about justice and equality in the corporate world. And that, in the end, was her true victory. As Sky Globe Airlines began its massive transformation, it was clear that this wasn't just a change in the company's policies or leadership. It was a wake-up call for an entire industry. The corporate world was now under the microscope. For years, issues like racial discrimination, exclusionary practices, and inequality in business had been pushed to the margins of the conversation. But Amanda Washington had flipped that script. Her story had not only exposed the injustices within Sky Globe, but had catalyzed a much-needed reckoning in the corporate world. The effects were felt immediately. In the weeks following Sky Globe's suspension, airlines across the globe began to take a long, hard look at their own internal practices. United Airlines, Delta, and American Airlines were among the first to announce comprehensive audits of their customer service procedures. What had once been dismissed as a few isolated incidents now became an industry-wide concern. Airline executives were now scrambling to avoid the kind of public backlash Sky Globe had suffered. It was clear the world was watching. But the shift wasn't just confined to the airline industry. Amanda's actions had ignited a firestorm of reform in other corporate sectors as well. Within a matter of weeks, several major corporations launched their own diversity and inclusion initiatives, many of which were specifically aimed at addressing discrimination in customer service. As investors began to scrutinize company cultures more closely, shareholder activism grew. They demanded to know how companies were addressing the very real issue of systemic bias and exclusion. For Amanda, this movement was only the beginning. Her involvement in the Sky Globe transformation had elevated her to the role of not just a corporate leader, but a symbol of resistance and change. Amanda was now sought after by organizations and lawmakers, not just for her business acumen, but for her courage to stand up for what was right. She was invited to speak at national summits and forums, where she discussed the need for businesses to move beyond lip service and actually build diverse, inclusive environments from the inside out. During a particularly powerful speech at the National Business Conference, Amanda told the audience, "It's not enough to talk about diversity. It's not enough to check boxes. If we truly want to change the culture of corporate America, we need to start from the top. It has to start with a commitment from leadership to create spaces where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." Her words were not just heard, they were felt. Corporate leaders, previously blind to the extent of the issues, were now grappling with the reality that their businesses might be perpetuating the very problems Amanda had so bravely exposed, and they knew they had to change or face irreparable damage to their reputation and brand. Sky Globe's new leadership, now firmly entrenched in the role of champions for inclusion and diversity, wasted no time in enacting policies that reflected their commitment to accountability. These policies weren't just for show. They were embedded into every aspect of the company's operations, from hiring practices to customer interactions. An internal investigation committee was formed, tasked with reviewing every aspect of the airline's operations to ensure that racial and gender discrimination would no longer be tolerated. Amanda's direct involvement in this process became a key part of her legacy. Not only was she instrumental in securing the changes within Sky Globe, but she also worked closely with other industry leaders, helping them understand that true transformation required more than just superficial fixes. It required systemic change and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. While Sky Globe was undergoing its overhaul, Amanda was also at the forefront of an even bigger movement, advocating for change at the federal level. She worked alongside civil rights organizations to push for stronger legislation to protect consumers from discrimination in all industries. For Amanda, it wasn't just about one airline or one corporation. It was about creating a world where people were no longer forced to endure the injustices that had been normalized for so long. Through her actions, Amanda was proving that one individual truly could make a difference. What started as a single confrontation at Gate 37B had now become a full-blown movement that challenged the very fabric of corporate America. And as the weeks turned into months, it became clear that this was a turning point, not just for Sky Globe, but for the entire world of business. The corporate world was no longer the same. Change was in the air, and it was happening faster than anyone could have imagined. But even as companies scrambled to implement new diversity initiatives and overhaul their internal cultures, Amanda remained focused on the bigger picture. She knew this fight was far from over. The next battle would be in the boardrooms, in the policy halls, and in the streets where people were demanding the equality that they had long been denied. As Sky Globe's transformation continued, Amanda's leadership and vision were becoming the blueprint for how businesses could successfully navigate the difficult road to real, lasting change. She wasn't just a CEO, she was a force of nature, a woman who had faced the ugliest of injustices and turned it into a powerful tool for change. And with each step she took, she inspired countless others to do the same. The lesson was clear. Injustice, when confronted head-on, could be defeated, and the price of ignoring that injustice was far higher than anyone had anticipated. As months passed, the ripples of Amanda Washington's actions continued to make waves far beyond the boundaries of SkyGlobe Airlines. The company, once synonymous with luxury and exclusivity, had been forced to face its darkest truths. It had suffered a catastrophic collapse, but out of that collapse arose a new ethos, driven by a commitment to inclusion and respect for every passenger, regardless of their race, gender, or background. SkyGlobe's actions were a clear reflection of what could happen when systemic problems were ignored for too long. The airline's groundbreaking transformation became a model for other companies, setting a new standard for corporate accountability and fairness. Yet the true legacy of Amanda's work extended beyond just SkyGlobe. It sent a powerful message that would echo through the halls of countless boardrooms across the globe. Discrimination could no longer be swept under the rug. Amanda's victory wasn't just about the immediate results. It was about the precedent it set for generations to come. SkyGlobe's suspension had been dramatic, but necessary. With over 21,000 employees temporarily placed on paid leave, the company's sudden halt allowed a much-needed introspection about the corporate cultures that had allowed discrimination to persist. It wasn't just about legal penalties, but about making those who held power understand the moral weight of their actions. As the airline industry took a long, hard look at itself, Amanda continued to use her platform to advocate for change. With the backing of her peers, she was able to drive forward new diversity policies within several other industries, emphasizing the importance of real, measurable actions over mere promises. The shift wasn't just a movement, it was a paradigm shift, changing the business world forever, and Amanda had been the catalyst. She was a reminder to all of us that standing firm against injustice, even in the face of overwhelming adversity, has the power to not just change one life or one company, but entire industries and societies. And in doing so, Amanda Washington had proven something profound. True power lies in doing what's right, even when the world tries to make you believe otherwise.